half beat ahead. Whichever tenant lived above my shop ran a washing machine without regard for the building's mood. The spin cycle announced itself by chorus, pipes buzzing in the wall, the cold water supply thudding twice, the sort of plumbing shiver old wood knows how to absorb. Every Monday, it came at 10:30 sharp, and every Monday I lifted a hand with a shop rag in it, like I could slow the tremble by gesture. On a Monday in late autumn, the tremble arrived early. I was in the back room with a mug that had belonged to somebody else, as grandmother, and a towel ID, washed until the printed roosters on it fainted to ghosts. I stood because I always stand in the back, leaning into the doorway, and the washing machine asked the pipes to sing. When the shiver ran through the building, the mirror leaning against the wall made a low, flat sound, a bass note, like the kind of drum a person thumps to warn of animals. I'd set it there after unloading it from the county van. I hadn't unwrapped it. The sound made me touch it. The mirror had arrived with a stack of unwanted furniture from an estate sale that turned into an estate apology. No one bought the long things. Wardrobes, cheval mirrors, china cabinets, those go to charity if you're lucky, to the dump if you're not. The county sometimes parked us in the middle for the in-betweens. Nothing precious, nothing actively rotten, the solid unloved. I owned Hollow House, a second-hand store where, according to the paper bag I paid a local printer to stamp, useful stories waited. I liked believing that a soap dish could hold a little history without making drama of it. The shiver faded. The fridge in the break corner hummed and stopped humming. I set my mug down and saw the circle it left on the rooster towel, a dark ring that took its time deciding what color it was. The mirror made no more sound. I wiped the floor where I'd tracked in a square of leaves. When I looked up, I caught myself in the glass, a half me in craft paper light. The plastic still clung to most of the frame. I'd left it because I'd planned to put a price tag on the mirror, not wake it. Outside, Gallows Hill turned its trees into dark strokes. The village, Beckford Hollow, had acquired a way of being that looked accidental from the highway and exact if you lived here long enough. Four-way stop at the bottom town office with a buzzer. You had to press twice brick library, pretending it used to be a school. Small rooms with big windows stuffed with things people want when they believe things will matter. I set up my cash wrap near the front, facing the door, so I could feel the bell and collect myself between the street and the aisle, where someone would run a finger along the edge of a plate and ask nothing into the air. The mirror was taller than me and meant to stand by itself, its own piece of furniture, not a sheet of glass held to a wall. The courier who dropped it laughed when we slid it off the cart. "Cursed," he said, "the way you call a cat murderer when it glances at a bird. They say it's cursed." He meant the rumors that stick to any object that people don't like having around after somebody dies in the house. The estate was a cottage on Cooper Street that had been part of the village, as long as the word cottage had sounded right. The old woman had no children. A niece came with keys and grief that made her shrug in the middle of sentences. "If you take it, you can have the rest," she told the county woman, which was nonsense, but grief makes a math that doesn't follow money. I slit the plastic with a utility knife and lifted a corner back. The frame was plain. Old varnish flaked where hands always touch hands. The glass was clean in the way very old glass can be, not sterile, not wiped to wipeness, but clean like a pond is clear, things in it that make its clarity belong to it. I wiped the corner with the rooster towel and the glass wiped itself, doing the small sound good glass makes, a high, almost note. The reflection returned me my posture exactly and wrong in a way I would only name later. I set it on the landing at the top of the short stair to the back, which is where long things live, until I decide whether they want the front. I wrote a tag with the price I would come down from without making a show of doing a favor. I put the tag in the little sleeve and taped it to the frame. When I walked away, the mirror walked as I did, which is what a mirror does, and when I stopped, its echo stopped. That should have been the end of it. If a story ends when you do exactly what you meant to accomplish, which almost none do, the first day with it was ordinary. I signed for 3 boxes of paperbacks I should not have bought. I scanned barcodes until the beeps inside the handheld arranged themselves into a night's soundtrack. I ate from the same plastic tub I always use on Mondays because I have not washed a proper container since spring. Customer count, 8. Sales, $69, and a promise from a woman named Lila to come back for a mixing bowl that matched her mother, S. I wrote her name on the tag with a pencil because pencil makes promises feel more reversible. At noon, the refrigerator compressor clicked hard and stayed on. A man who should have been somewhere else came in to warm his hands and touched nothing. At 4, my downstairs neighbor S smoke alarm tried a high chirp that let me know the battery liked to toy with the idea of death. The first wrong thing came late, with the lights buzzing and the late day light turning the front glass into a mirror of the street. I was counting bills, lips moving without sound, because counting begs for ritual. I looked up and saw someone on the landing, and felt the kind of startle you feel when the shop S bell has not rung and you are alone. It was me. It was a reflection of me, where there shouldn't have been a reflection. The landing mirror returned the store to itself. Still, the night window returned the store to the street, moving. The me at the landing had a chest and shoulders in the right place and carried the towel in the right hand. And yet, when I lifted that hand because the reflection had lifted it, the me in the glass lifted not in time with me, not the way a hand and its mirror rise and meet, but as if a thought in my head had preceded me and the thought had been caught in glass and made into a person who was a half-breath ahead. It was small. So small, I almost reached for a ruler. In the time you measure by 1 and 2, it was less than the point between. My mind did exactly the thing a mind trained on shelves and receipts does. It made a place on a shelf where an explanation could sit later and set the anomaly there with a little wedge of paper that said internal lights versus window. Check. After closing, I went upstairs to the apartment with the plastic tub and the rooster towel. The apartment smelled like thawed bread and lemon cleaner from the last time I said, out loud to the air, that I would do better. I drank water from the tap and put the glass down and watched the ring on the counter, because I have let rings become proof that I am here. The refrigerator came on and made the room hum and then made the room stop humming, and each time I felt the hum leave the air, it came back in a different corner of my jaw. My name is Rowan. It is the sort of name that makes people tell you about trees and red berries they think they remember in countries they do not live in. I am the sort of person who says yes and then wipes down the counter, and the saying of yes and the wiping down are both true. I moved to Beckford Hollow because I could afford the rent over the store, and because there are places in the world where no one knows you, and that fact felt a kindness that first summer. I learned the streetlights pacing. I learned the personal noises of neighboring houses. I memorized which Saturdays the town required a blue bag for trash. Noon became a certain smell when the diner switched from breakfast to soup. There are years that refuse to be marked, and there are months that acquire a personality and drag a dozen days with them. That autumn wanted light bulbs and plumbers. It wanted receipts to sigh when they printed. It wanted the smell of cold pennies on my fingers when the old cash drawer bit my hand. A story about a mirror needs an origin and a reason. The village, according to those who like to say what goes around fireside televisions, has always had a cursed mirror. Not this mirror necessarily, a mirror. The one people talk about moves from house to house as needed. It is good for dropping into conversation when you think a hard truth has walked past your door and chosen you. He looked into that mirror and saw himself stealing, somebody will say, and the other somebody's nod toward a man not in the room. She saw herself kiss the wrong man, someone will say later. The mirror is a tool for naming what a person wants to name while filing off the burrs of blame. I learned to let these stories float. If you live above a shop, you have to make your mind a place where stories can float without snagging. Tuesday, I put the mirror on the floor in the front and leaned it against the case with the costume jewelry. I wanted it gone. I have no need for big things. I like the practical. Mugs that will not crack, towels that have learned how to dry, chairs that can be sat in by anyone. The mirror would be only a sail to get out of the way. For once, I did not drag it up the stairs to the landing. I left it where a body might meet it and see, in the easy accident of passing it, a need. Patty came at 11 for a pack of cards because the ones in her drawer lost a jack. She touched the mirror with the tips of 2 fingers. "It came from Cooper Street," she said, not a question. She always knows what came from where, because the village tells her without making it seem like gossip. She leaned in to admire whatever Patty admires when she sees herself. She has a face that makes space for a smile without the smile itself. She leaned, she straightened, she pressed her mouth as if considering toothpaste. "Lights," she said, as if that answered a question I had not asked. She paid for the cards. She took the receipt and folded it into smaller rectangles very precisely in front of me, so I would notice how small a thing can be made. At noon, the bell on the door rang twice with nobody behind it. I'd put a mechanism on it, so it would ring on, entering and leaving, but sometimes it decided that an arrival and a departure were one. The scanner beeped until I thought it might learn a melody. I thrummed my fingers on the counter, and the sound on the wood made me think of the mirror's first sound, that flat drum sound from the washing machine through the wall. And by the time I stood up, the mirror gave me back my movement and helped me decide that, yes, today it was a smudge on the glass causing it. Yes, perhaps my mind was clocked half a breath behind my eyes after a night of washing dishes I should have washed before. There is a kind of denial that looks like prayer. "It's nothing," you say in that tone to the air that you know is not listening and you know is a kind of skin. At 3:30, I unrolled the blue mat in back and stretched because the physical therapist who saw me once drew a picture of a spine and a bathtub and said they were the same kind of curve. Muscles that should be steady in the back become petulant under certain kinds of work and certain kinds of sitting. Stretch, and they may not punish you tonight. I bent and reached and breathed and glanced, because we all do, and the mirror held me in the middle of bending and in the middle of reaching, and for a second, I saw me move in 2 places. The body that is mine, making the careful slow with the kind of concentration you bring to a pain that belongs to you, and the other body that was my body doing the same motion and being a little farther ahead, as if the reflection had started the bend before I thought to start. I straightened fast enough to make the world pulse and then beat. A lab technician once at a dinner party had told me about a thing the brain does. "You make your move before you know it," she said, tapping her forehead with a fork handle. "A readiness potential. The brain lays the intention down before the light in your mind turns on. There's no free will if you watch the right measure." "You're great at parties," someone had said, but she was right. I hadn't believed it in a way that would matter to a person's hours, but I liked knowing it. An interesting rot in the floorboards you could step around. That night I slept with the radio between stations because the apartment makes too few noises of its own to convince me it is companionable. I woke to the lawn service down the street and the smell of gasoline climbing like an animal over the sill. I made coffee and read a local post about a child who had put his hand to the mirror in the old Cooper Street house and pulled away saying, "It's cold in there." I often read before the shop opened, not because I want to know, but because not knowing someone else's business makes my own feel louder than I like. That morning, the post was in a voice I recognized, Lila's. and my name appeared once for no reason that would matter to a person who had not stood at my counter with a mixing bowl. I wrote a reply I deleted. I got dressed and dropped the keyring twice. I counted the drawer out loud and ended on the wrong number and had to start over. On Wednesday, a girl came in with wet hair and a backpack and the careful posture of someone who has to move through a town as if the town could bruise her. Ella worked mornings at the diner and afternoons at the daycare. Her mother had the polite illness that makes you quiet in rooms and brave in private. Ella took a mug off a shelf and set it back, and for a second the mirror showed me not Ella setting it back, but a hand setting back the mug, and then Ella looking down at the tag, and then price in that order, like a stage direction. The order was wrong. She had looked at the tag before she had set the mug back. I would have sworn to it because my eyes had been on her and not on the mirror. It occurred to me that the mirror was adopting a taste for theatre. I shook my head and set a cast iron skillet on a dolly and married it to the corner where everything heavy goes when it refuses to be sorted. "Great mirror," Ella said, as if making conversation with a shop owner could change how the village looks through you. "Old glass," I said. "That usually satisfies. It suggests craft. People like craft as a word in their mouths, even people who do not care about making." At closing, I turned off half the lights and stood at the door with the key and watched the mirror watch me. The air about it seemed slightly colder. That would be because glass is often colder than what surrounds it, and autumn at dusk sends thin air down the stairs and under the door and shows a mirror how it might become a pond later. I'm not someone who believes in temperature deciding what a room will feel like. But that night, I thought of how a person puts a hand to a forehead to test a fever, and felt guilty for never having learned where in a face you actually find necessary warmth. Thursday morning, the town woke weird. The traffic lights at the bottom of Main hung on yellow half a minute longer than reason. The radio said part of the highway would be closed for paving, and then the radio said part of the river would be closed for keeping. And then the radio said words about boil advisories in the next county, as if that mattered to a place with a river that everyone swore was good. I stood with my coffee at the front and watched a woman who had parked to use her phone. She caught herself in the mirror and adjusted her shirt, and then she adjusted it again in the mirror, the way you correct for the correction, double, and then maybe right. She looked down at her hands after she had lifted them, and I don't know why my body read that as a message she had not meant to send. The bells for school sounded late and sounded with an echo like the bells were being rung in a neighboring village at the same time, and we were hearing both. "Are you taking returns?" a man asked at noon without making it a question or a friendliness. The shop had been his wife's idea. You saw that because he had the politeness of the coerced. He set a glass vase near the mirror, and for a second, the reflection showed his hand not setting but taking, and it looked wrong, because all the habits you've learned train you to understand putting down as different than lifting up. He glanced at his reflection, and then at me, and I took the vase and carried it softly away, because all my work is about making motion all the same kind of okay. He left. The receipt printed the numbers I told it to print. I tucked coffee money into the wooden box and told myself I had not seen anything, that light lagged sometimes when a bad ballast somewhere stuttered. Friday, the mirror was still on the floor, and I had not priced it up or down. The building made a noise I had never heard, and I opened the basement door and stood at the top of the back stairs and listened until I knew the noise came not from anything alive or electrical, but from something growing, and I punished myself for admitting it by going down into the basement and looking at nothing until I found the crack in the old clay that had always been there and would always be there, and touched the wall and let the dust make my fingers bright in the one bar of window light, and then coughed like someone else. A child's after-school group trooped past the store, and one of them, A boy with a face that promised jokes broke from the line and flattened both palms hard on my glass door and laughed at the handprints as if leaving marks were a way to write a name in a place that keeps no names. The teacher in a yellow vest said his name, and he said his name as if she had suggested he had forgotten it. He looked in at the mirror and did something I have never seen. He punched at the air in front of his own reflection and then winced, not because his hand hurt, but because the reflection did not punch with him in the same beat and for a second played at hitting him back. I went to the door and turned the bolt and made a show of wiping the glass with the rooster towel. The handprints came off and the child's face changed color at the edges as if he had been running. The teacher touched his shoulder. "Don't," she said, "not which thing." He went back to his line of children who would grow and leave for open places that use your name with less reverence. I found myself standing facing the mirror with the towel in my hand like I could move the day around in front of me if I made the right shape on the glass. After dinner, the lights in the apartment hummed into old sounding. There is a tone fluorescent tubes find when they want to tell you time has been here too long. My upstairs neighbor's washing machine started again, an unpunctual insistence. I stood in the hall and watched my mirror on the landing and watched myself watch my mirror on the landing, and then, because the mirror in the hall is only there to keep the angle of the stairs from feeling like a throat, I walked down into the store to turn the thermostat up, in case the mirror on the floor would feel less like a pond and more like any room. The store dark had its own weather. When I walked through it, objects acknowledged me. The mid-century chairs settled their legs. The glass cabinets fought the urge not to fog. The mirror knew me, and I do not say that because I want drama. It knew me because I recognized the sound in my head that means you have stepped into a scene that has been rehearsed. When I raised my hand, the reflection raised a hand. It always would. I kept it up half a breath longer than comfortable because I wanted to see if the mirror would demand I keep the rhythm it liked. Mine began to tremble, a small tremble, the sort that is no one's business. The reflection held steady an extra half beat, and that steadiness made me push my hand down faster than I meant to, as if leaving up there would get me stuck. I slept with the radio off so the apartment could be alone with its noises. It coughed. A tap dripped once and apologized for it. The fridge made a surprised sound like someone letting out a held breath in a room they thought was empty. I woke and did not remember the dream, only the shadow a dream leaves when the subject is a weight behind your forehead that feels like you did something you cannot admit to anybody who remembers you bending for the skillet at 3 in the afternoon. Saturday, the village turned its different face toward the weekend. Trucks that cannot fit in single parking spaces were pointed at coffee like a requirement. People walked with their bags empty and their hands ready. The mirror caught all of that and returned it with a film over it, like the one old televisions used to put over the 30 minutes you waited for a picture. A woman in a red coat stopped in front of it and lifted her hands to rearrange her hair. And we both watched her hands do it, and then in the mirror, her hands did a different arrangement, small but not the same. And she blinked 3 times, quicker reflex, and the mirror blinked wrong, and she made a short sound in her throat and did the kind of fake laugh that women in places like this make to keep a moment from biting. She said nothing and left, and the bell on the door rang as if I were keeping a score I could redeem later. "Bathroom," one of the daycare children said, as if I were a hallway to be used. Lila followed. She held up fingers. "2, please," and I nodded. The bathroom is clean because I am who I am, and because every object in my shop might have a life that requires kindness. Lila walked past the mirror, and for a second her face went wrong in it. Not ugly, not aged, not enlarged, just a face that had laid down in bed with itself and spoken in an unfamiliar voice. She shook her head once, the way a person tries to dislodge a single hair, and did not meet my eyes. The child's shoes made an impatient sound on the tile, small sole slaps that sounded like birds pecking. When they came out, I held the door because I thought that made me someone Lila might tell big news to in a few weeks when it had turned into a funny story. She avoided the mirror the way you avoid looking at yourself when you know you will not see nothing, only how much you have not slept. She put a hand out and touched the frame, and the hand in the reflection had touched the frame first, the slightest moment before. "You okay?" I said, a phrase that in a shop becomes an invoice for 20 minutes of catching up if the person needs it, and a receipt for nothing if they don tea. "Static," she said. "Everything's been staticky since the wind changed." She gestured vaguely toward the hill. "It's like when you put on a sweater wrong and start seeing sparks. It'll pass." "It'll pass," I said, because repeating is a way of acknowledging the shape of fear without taking responsibility for cleaning it up. The day cooled. The thermostat needed new batteries, so it made that little click, click, click that sounds like decision without the result. The street got louder than the store. My phone vibrated against the counter and announced a message written by someone at the town office who writes like a person who emails themselves to sleep. "Out of an abundance of caution," the message said, "residents are advised to limit non-essential travel after dark due to the outage expected on the East Feeder." Closure without the word closure. The power company says it will be only 3 hours. 3 hours became 4. The streetlights downstairs had to stay on a little reserve inside their heads. The village grew the kind of dark a person sees as privacy until their reflection in a window tells them otherwise. Ella died that night. I did not know until morning. I woke to a cluster of notifications that had found me like moths. The village learned in a chain: a siren, a walkie squeal, a radio voice, a sound near the diner that was the same sound portions of the town heard during storms, delivered there instead of wind. The post said, "Taken from us." They said, "Unspeakable." They said, "She was light." They said her name like you say a name, so it won't forget its pronunciation. I opened the shop and left the lights off. I made coffee and did not drink it. The refrigerator hummed, and my chest answered with a hum that did not belong to this time of day. Patty came at 10 and stood in the doorway without stepping over the threshold. "You heard," she said, without needing my answer. "Car," I said, innocent when I should not have been. The world makes a ladder for a story to climb, and your mind climbs it right away. Road, car, wrong. "Not a car," Patty said, herself. "What they're saying is..." She gestured to the mirror before she said mirror. "Gallows Hill, that little turn by the guardrail. It's a mirror there in the dark once you know it's there. They're saying she saw herself." "Saw herself," I said. A sentence that means nothing if you look at it, and means everything in a place that believes a mirror can show you the thing that will kill you. She looked at me like I ought to take the mirror out and lay it under a blanket in the street and let people put rocks on the blanket until it gave. "It's not cursed," I said. "We don't do that." She looked at the glass and saw my reflection. I watched her read the reflection's face and not mine. "Maybe move it back," she said. "Upstairs. People are full." It wasn't that I refused. I carried the mirror to the back and turned it toward the wall, which felt like I had put a person into the corner for bad behavior. I stood with my hands on the frame an extra second because it felt as if the frame had warmed while down here in the morning. Issy shade, it should have been cold. "We're not medieval," I said to myself, and that sentence sounded like somebody else's. I tried to be ordinary. I stacked a few too many plates and heard them object and put 2 back on the shelf with the care you give fresh eggs. I scanned tags and the barcode beeps organized themselves into a chant. I printed a sign that said, "Closed Sun Mon," because sometimes closures help a town think it has made a decision. The label machine gave me the words in lines just slightly crooked and pushed them out warm and smelling of clean plastic. I aligned the 2 curls as straight as I could. I taped them to the door, and the tape gave, first on one side, then on the other, as if refusing to get involved. When I went upstairs, I was the kind of tired that makes your vision make its own choices. The hallway mirror showed a flash of someone going the other way, and I had to stand with my ears ringing for a second before believing it was only me. I washed a plate, and my hand slipped, and the plate went into the dish rack the wrong way and sat there like a mistake someone else had made. I dried it with the rooster towel, and the towel smelled like the underside of a radiator in a room where no one had been for a long time. I dreamed around midnight that I had brought the mirror back out and set it in front of the counter, and it had made a sound like a person speaking into a fan. And when I leaned closer, it said my name in the voice of someone who had last said it when I was 5. I woke with my mouth open and the motion of a swallow behind my ears. The apartment kept its breath like a person at a funeral does when they do not want to cry until the right verse. Sunday, the mirror waited upright in the back, with the plastic at its ankles, like a small flood. I don't open on Sundays out of superstition, and because the village doesn't, and because I am fond of how a day sounds, with no one asking you if you have something the right price. I went down to the store anyway, because sitting in the apartment with the radio makes the words on the radio become too intimate. The street was quiet in the way the street is quiet when there has been a change in the composition of its life. A hand-lettered notice at the town office said words about community grief support and about gathering safely. The word safely had underlines. Safely is always for the living. I unlocked because unlocking is something I do with my hands that convinces my head I have somewhere to be. I turned the mirror from the wall because punishment feels small when the thing you are punishing does not regret. It reflected what it had been given, a row of wooden crates that had once held apples and now held nothing, a crooked map on the wall with pushpins in places that had made people sigh, a wire basket full of door hinges. I moved my hand slowly and watched. I lifted it, lowered it, kept it very still. I counted out loud and felt the count vibrate inside my throat, like there was another person under my chin trying to persuade me not to. The reflection kept up and then kept on, and when I let the hand drop, mine did. And the one in the glass did, and then the one in the glass reached that extra half inch, like someone completing a motion I had lost interest in. The difference was slight and enough to make the room assume a new angle. I wasn't afraid in the way a person says they re-afraid because their apartment S window rattled or because a siren disrespected their nap. The fear was the kind that imagines a shape in a pond under your feet and knows that it will not come up and bite you because it has something worse in mind. I had a memory of my father showing me a fish in a bucket when I was too small and saying, "See how it moves before it knows it wants to move." That is not a thing anyone has ever said. It is the kind of thing a brain writes in the margins because it likes to make an origin. I put 2 fingers to the glass. It was cold, the same cold as any mirror in any room where you close the blinds. I pressed harder and for a second felt a little tug, as if something on the other side of the glass liked the idea of distance being smaller. I pulled my hand back and the glass made the sticky sound skin and glass make when they introduce themselves. The rooster towel left a small grease sheen when I cleaned it. The reflection cleaned as I cleaned, and for a heartbeat my hand in the mirror fell out of time with my hand. And then my head decided that was because a fluorescent tube had taken the second to choose death and then had chosen life instead. The council called an emergency meeting Sunday night because this is what councils do when there is nothing to do and something to mark. They put folding chairs in rows and they put announcements on a table and they asked a minister from up the road to stand where everyone could see him. "No ghosts," he said, "no curses." His voice had a timing to it, as if he was fitting the words into a cuttlefish bone. Grief does strange things to rooms. I heard him through the doorway and watched the mirror on my landing watch me watch him watch the town. Someone from the clinic stood and said another kind of sentence: sleep, eat, do not drive tired. Someone from the power company said words about feeders east and west. Someone from the school said they would open the gym for the night like a backup prayer. Someone from nowhere, a man I did not recognize except as someone who will always stand, talked about the mirror in the Cooper Street house, and someone shushed him, violently, with love. A girl behind me cried once, a sound like a hiccup that took too long. "Close tomorrow," the councilwoman said, "out of respect." Closures belong to councils because they can do them, and the doing is a way to keep your hands from telling you they are empty. She did not look anywhere in particular when she said it, which is how a person says a thing when they know half the town has already done it and the other half won tea, and they want to be the one who at least tried to harmonize the halves. I closed Monday. I stood in the shop anyway. The refrigerator hummed, and the hum came up through the floor and into the legs of the tables and into my legs. I held a spoon long enough that it got warm. I put it down, and it made a cold sound. The phone rang once, because automated things do not read notices on town doors. I turned it over and let the little screen make light and then stop making light, and the mirror accepted that, took it, and I felt suddenly like anyone who had ever believed a mirror to be a mouth had had a kind of reasonable idea after all. The first official rumor came from the town office in a form that looked like an announcement, but was a rumor. Out of an abundance of caution, it said, because they love that phrase, we ask residents to avoid congregating around reflective surfaces near roadways at night. The sentence found its way into a world as if it had to apologize for itself on every porch it passed. Patty forwarded it twice. Lila sent me nothing. I did not respond to anyone because I was watching myself walk in and out of rooms, and the part of me that watches was tired in my ribs. The second rumor came in the place people when too full run to on Sundays, a Facebook group where photographs go to be loved or grudged. The administrator posted a picture of gallows curve in daylight. There is a guardrail and a field and a stand of birches that look wrong when the light is wrong. There is no mirror. There is a view of the village that looks like the view a person gets from a place they have no intention of leaving. The comment below asked about Ella's hands. People wrote the word hands like a new recipe. They argued about it gently and then fiercely, and then ceased arguing and began offering casseroles. Midweek, the mirror in the shop returned to me exactly what I give it, and not exactly what I give it. The reflection moved right when I moved left, and then, when I stood and breathed and did not make a motion, improved on my posture the smallest bit, a tidy fraction, as if someone else's mother had reached into the frame and made me stand like I might be spoken to. I felt my shoulders want to cooperate with her and harden at once. I moved my left hand a little. The left hand in the mirror moved as I moved it, and then made the motion it wanted, opening my fingers all the way, instead of the tentative half-hearted gesture I'd started. It did not feel like betrayal, not yet. It felt like a correction I could choose not to accept if I were a better person. I met a friend for coffee in the diner, because that is what people do when the building they own wants too much of them. The fridge in the back made a sound like a man drawing a final breath. And then the coffee machine fixed itself into that place where it is pretending to pour 100 cups, but is only pouring 3. We sat and did the adult thing. We named our sadness and then gave it back because the pile had someone else's name on it. I told her I had the mirror in the shop, and she said, "Oh," in a way that said she would not touch my glass with a 10-foot stick. She glanced over my head at the mirror behind the counter the waitress uses to see who has left, and whether the kind of person who leaves without paying looks like someone who would be sorry if asked. Her face changed without changing. "Static," she said, as if Lila had given her the word and she had decided it would be enough. The receipt printer made a tight squeak. The waitress folded the ticket where it folded most cleanly and set it on the table. The fold caught the light like a blade. Friends of Ella laid flowers on the guardrail. People kept them high, in the metal. The paper around the stems made soft whisper sounds, like someone telling a blanket to be quiet. The first night it rained a little, and I went past because when a town puts itself in one place, you pay tribute by pointing your body at it for a second, and in the reflection in the puddle, you could see the flowers brighten and then die, and then stand perfectly upright and then bow, and I have never seen puddle water do that, ever. I bent to look closer. I saw myself bending, and the person in the puddle bent earlier, and I stood too fast and the world wobbled, and a man I had never met put a hand out like he might touch my elbow, and then did not, because grief has no right to touch strangers without being asked to. Thursday night, power died when the deli closed. It died with the sound of something being unplugged politely. It did that blue dimming that is not black. The street and the shop belong to the old rules. Light where you can afford it. I lit the lantern I keep by the counter for storms. The mirror on the floor in the lantern light looked like something that had learned a new language and wanted to practice it on someone who would not correct its grammar. I stood before it. I lifted my right hand. The reflection raised its left, yes, as always, but then it turned its right palm very casually toward its throat, and I swear to you I did not. I did not move my right hand. I kept it exactly where I wanted it, and the pawn in the glass, which was me weak and tutored, changed its mind and put its hand to its neck with a kind of curiosity, and slid a thumb to where a pulse lives, if you want to find it. I swallowed and felt my own thumb where the mirror had put it in the mirror, and then I moved my hand, because I am a person, and the person in the mirror owns the hand, if I let him, and I did not. I stepped back into the Voyager S dark of the store, and my knee hit a table leg, and as my knee decided whether to tell me what it thought about that, the mirror finished a double motion, and the hand it had lifted as me lowered slow, and then, there is no other way to say this, clapped once without making any sound. It was a half-hearted clap, a slow clap, a clap without courage. It hit air that had forgotten air's purpose, the noise my apartment fridge makes when it quits and the building finds another hum to share came then, and I realized I had been holding my breath, and that is ridiculous. A person cannot hold their breath that long. All night, the old house sounds made the place a throat. I drew the bolt and watched the bolt reflect me drawing it, and the reflected bolt closed a little too far and then corrected itself back into the groove. I brushed my teeth, and the mirror in the hallway reflected the motion I made with my right hand and then my left, and the left motion felt cleaner, and the reflection chose a rhythm for me without asking. I tried to sleep, and did fall to sleep, and woke with my hands posed as if on a keyboard, which is not something I have in my apartment. I dreamed somebody else's job. I dreamed I arranged other people's hours. I dreamed the mirror asked me to practice ascent. The static in the air raised the hair on my forearms. Friday, someone told me the worst story, the kind that has a mechanical part. They say her hands would not stop moving, a woman said, as someone you would expect to know because she worked in an office with screens. They say she was like a puppet. She grimaced into her cup. God forgive me, that's not... They should not say such things. She said them again on the way out to the sidewalk because the town requires repetition to get anything out of itself. That afternoon, the clinic closed early. Someone had turned off the cable TV in the waiting room, and the room looked like a place that had been cleaned already and would never get dirty again. Saturday morning, I took the mirror upstairs because you do what Patty tells you to do eventually. I carried it with a gloved hand because fingerprints on old glass feel vulgar. The landing has that way of making objects feel like they have earned a rest. The mirror leaned where it had leaned before, and I stepped back, and I did not see myself. There was nothing supernatural there. It did not become a person. It did not withhold me. It held the stairs and the wall and the lamp and the rooster towel folded in my hand. I lifted the towel, and the image of the towel in the glass lifted and then, tiny but enough to give me hunger, shook itself as if water came off it. I had not shaken it. The reflection had. My hands had done nothing but hold a folded thing, and in the mirror I shook out the towel gently and made it flat and laid it on the stair rail. My hands stayed still, and my hands, over there, made my day like they were late for something. I don't know if I made a sound. No one asked me later about a sound. The apartment above, the washer above, the pipes, the wires, the bulb, all kept their noises. The downstairs door jangled, and I pretended I did not hear it. I waited to see if the mirror would reach for my throat with my hand. It did not, which is almost worse. It did something barely worse. It smiled for me mildly, an expression I have learned as manners and wear when a person needs me to wear it. It smiled with the mouth I was not moving, and put the edges up slightly, and looked like a man doing the right thing in a room of people and choosing to remain an object. There was no catastrophe. There was not a series of dramatic beds that I fell onto. There was only the end of a small line I had been walking for days, without knowing how long it had been, and no place to put my foot next. I took the towel and I covered the mirror. I made a neat drape. I know what I looked like doing it because the mirror downstairs in the bathroom watched me and made my mouth a line. The fabric did not move. There was no ghostly outline. I left the stairlight on to make the landing believe it was a day. I went downstairs and stood behind the counter, which is the kind of place a person stands when they need a desk to lie to them about being an office they belong to. When the door opened, Lila came with a coat she had found in a closet and wanted to sell because the closet needed to be only a closet now. She set it on the counter and did not turn to the mirror because she knew it was under cloth. She looked at me and at the line my mouth made, and for a second my reflection in the small convex security mirror behind the register looked right. She touched her throat. It looked like an absent-minded touch you might make if you were in a room where somebody has been lost. In the mirror, behind the register, the touch became the placing of a hand deliberately and the pressing of fingers gently, and then the removal of the hand as if what it tested had satisfied it, and the Lila at the counter looked away, and I watched both Lilas, and nobody in the room felt they had done anything they had not wanted to do. I rang the sale, and the barcode beep sounded hearty. I folded the receipt until it fit the pocket she had for it. She turned to go, and on the way out she glanced up the stairs as if she could feel a covered shape in a room, and needed to be sure it could not see her with its blanket on. For the rest of the day, people came and went, and none of them were Ella. The town wanted to be a furnace and a couch. It did a kind of hopeless kindness well. By dusk, there was a handprint on the blanket where it covered the mirror. I had not put it there. It was in the wrong place for me. I felt stupid that I had a glue of tears available for this and had not used them in the places where people would expect them. I stood on the stair and watched the handprint as if it were a photograph someone could tell me the origin of if I would only ask the right person. At closing, I folded the blanket twice so that the handprint lived inside, and I set the mirror down flat on the landing. The glass faced the ceiling. The ceiling light warmed the glass. The glass warmed the air. I locked the downstairs door, and I locked the upstairs door, and I double-checked both, because the kind of mind you grow when you live with glinting objects requires repeated checking. I made soup. The radio said a small advisory had been lifted. The words they use, advisory, lifted, safety, caution, took turns with overhead phrases like out of respect and out of an abundance. The refrigerator made its small, happy noise, and then its worried one. I fell asleep with the radio on. At 3 in the morning, someone knocked gently on the shop door, the way a person with small hands would. Or the building, having learned how to make that sound, made it for me, because my ears had asked. I went down in bare feet. I looked through the glass and saw only the street with its light in little circles. I stood on the stairs for a long time. The towel waited folded on the rail, and the blanket waited folded over the mirror, and the handprint hid in the fold. And I felt awake like a person would feel if they had not slept in 3 days, but had, and their sleep had been a mannerism, and offered no rest. Sunday I did nothing wrong. I wrote checks, I answered 3 emails. I cleaned a ring around a glass with the rooster towel and saw the ring go, and I saw the ring stay in another reflection, and I told myself I had left nothing unclean. I went up to the landing and brought the mirror down in the middle of the day and uncovered it in the middle of the day because light declared itself a person on my side. The mirror did a small thing. When my foot went down, the other foot went down slightly earlier and slightly later, and then decided on slightly earlier as its position for the day. I said aloud, "No," and felt the silliness of that and said it again, and my mouth in the mirror did not say it until I stopped. There are other endings. In one of them, the village drags the mirror into the square and smashes it to a fine mess, and everyone breathes easier for exactly 2 days. And then the small decisions their bodies have been making for them all along come back in confusing ways. In another ending, a person goes into the mirror, and the person who does not go into the mirror goes on with their day. A child invented that one after church, and was told not to say it again in a tone that suggested the child had been obscene without knowing the word. The ending we got was the quiet one. Spring came late, and the river broke politely. The flowers on the guardrail turned to paper and were replaced without noise by flowers of cloth. The council kept the notice about reflective surfaces on the office corkboard until the thumbtacks rusted. People stopped touching their throats when they talked. They touched other places, a cheek, a wrist, a belt loop, because those places were not frowned upon by whatever rules for grief live in a town that has learned how to balance its mouth between and. Lila stopped coming on Mondays. She started coming on Thursdays. That meant something, and I refused to guess. The mirror stayed in the shop, and then someone bought it. A young couple, the kind that believes the shape of a house matters to the conversations they will have in it. They loaded it into their small truck, and he tied the rope too loose, and she said, "That's too loose." And he said, "It will be fine." And she made her mouth into a line, and he tightened the rope. They were not cruel to each other. They were doing the choreography of ordinary. When they left, the shop felt thinner and for a second bright. I stood in the empty space like a person trying on the idea of a room. The alley held its breath and exhaled fryer oil. I went upstairs, and the mirror on the landing, the small one, not the one I had sold, returned my throat to me and showed a pulse I did not know to look for. I felt the pulse, and it felt like any pulse after stairs and soup. I took the rooster towel and I folded it. Well, I put it to my face. It smelled like lemon and heat and a very faint metal sweetness because the washing machine upstairs had been run last night and something had rattled inside the drum, and it had been as honest about its rattling as a person can be. In the months since, my hands do what I want them to do most of the time. On some mornings, dark winter mornings with the shop light a small square in the street, I stand before a window, and in the window I watch the timing of the person who is me. The movement is like a breath a half beat ahead. It is almost unseeable. It would not hold up to a test. If a scientist from a party arrived with a scanner for my back brain, I could show her none of this and be sorry to have wasted her time. The town is better at not naming it now. The traffic light at the bottom of Main found its rhythm again. The power company learned to underpromise. The river accommodates all it is asked to hold. Once at closing, I turned the key in the door and caught my reflection in the glass mine and the shop behind me. And I lifted a hand to wave to the diner across the street because she waves and I wave. And that is what keeps a village from being only a collection of years. My hand rose, And in the glass, the hand a hair ahead of mine finished the wave and was still before mine started. It set itself down gently. It looked like a person doing kindnesses in the order they have been assigned. I stood there a moment longer than it was comfortable to let anyone see. The air inside the shop cooled like water in a sink. The refrigerator hummed and stopped and hummed. The bell on the door made a sound like a little laugh when anyone else would have heard only the jingle of leaving. I thought of Ella in the way that is honest, not as some spoken of light, but as a person with wet hair and a backpack and a posture you notice because you have learned not to accidentally hurt people by looking. I thought of hands that would not stop, not because of any curse, but because bodies have practice, and sometimes practice keeps going. In the mirror, in the window, in the black, where the outside is supposed to be another inside, I watched my reflection learn my schedule and improve it, and I realized I had stopped believing in the difference between seeing and being seen. If my hands sometimes show me what they want to do, before I decide I will let them, if the towel sometimes moves a half beat before I lift it, if the mirror in a friend's hallway catches my mouth in a shape my mouth says it did not make, there is nothing to call the police about. There is only the quiet, the work, the hum. They say the cursed mirror revealed the truth of reflexes. The phrase makes it sound like a choice and like a test. I think of it now and think of the word relief. The relief on a face when it learns a decision can be made early and handed to a body. I do not ask the shop mirror to confess anything. Its job is to hold daylight until closing. Mine is to count cash with my mouth moving and fold receipts into perfect halves and carry chairs in twos. Some evenings I stop at the bottom of the stair and look up, and for a second imagine the handprint is still inside the blanket, and on those nights I do not unfold it. There is a way to leave a door that looks deliberate and a way that looks like you will be back soon. The mirror taught me the first one. I have lived a life that wants the second. I choose the first, often enough now that the bell does not sound surprised. If anyone asks, and they rarely do, because grief makes polite people of us, I say the thing everyone in Beckford Hollow says, like a prayer and a promise, like a warning, and a way to put off what your body wants to do next. Out of an abundance, I say, and the sentence ends where it must, a hand lifted half high, held, and then laid down gently, as if the air above the counter were fragile and could bruise.